So we're in your government book. We're in chapter 11, and we're dealing with state and local government. And we just went over the state legislatures, and now we're going to be going over the state courts, which is the judicial branch of the state. Now, don't get this mixed up with our federal government. When we're talking about the federal government and the Supreme Court of the federal government, and which is the judicial branch, and the executive branch being the president of the United States. All of that, no. We're talking about each individual states. We have 50 states, and each state has its own courts, right? In fact, there's a dual court system, which means that if a court case starts in a state, it usually ends in that state. If a court case starts in the federal courts, it usually ends in the 40 federal courts. They rarely overlap unless the federal government needs to get involved because of federal law, or that basically Constitution of the United States is affected, which is very rare. So usually it begins in a state, it ends in that state, or vice versa. If it begins in the government, it ends in the state, in the federal government. So 90% of the cases of all court cases are handled by each state. So we have a huge amount, 90% of the cases. And they're basically, what do these courts do? They interpret the meaning of the laws, and they punish the violators. If they a lot of times have to go to trial in the midst of this. We'll talk. The state actually sees both civil cases and criminal cases, both. And we went over those before, where the civil cases are between, a plaintiff and a defendant. One is suing the other. And then we have the criminal cases, those cases that basically are jurisdiction of criminal, criminal and a prosecutor for the case of a criminal case. So, and we went over those earlier, so I'm not going to get into all of that. So, the level of the state courts. This is pretty important. There are different levels, 4 different levels. Let me go ahead and show you them. I'm going to go skip ahead a bit right here. Here's the levels. So, there's 4 levels. The bottom level are the courts of limited jurisdictions, and these include police, probate, family, juvenile, small claims, all these lower courts. And then we have the main trial court, and the main trial where you have a trial, so in these you have judges. You'll have a judge there, and then you have one judge that's looking over of this. Then you'll have a main trial, and you'll have usually one judge, sometimes more, depending on the certain trial, there'll be one judge, but if you have you'll have more judges that deal with these trials, let's just say that. And then you have the Court of Appeals, where a trial court case is being appealed, and these judges sit around and they look to make sure the trial went well. They don't do trials, but they look over all what happened in the other courts as they appeal to that court. And then, of course, you have the state Supreme Court, when you have all these Supreme Court judges looking over even in depth to see if everything was lawful through the trial. So there's 4 levels. So let's go back and look at these levels in detail, because each state has different names for these levels. So the levels of court. So the lower state, let's talk about the lower level first. The lower level, justice of the peace. Have you ever heard of justice of the peace? A lot of times I remember people that wanted to get married really quick, they just ran to the justice of the peace and got married and got their marriage license, right? Justice of the peace gives the marriage license. Of course, it's good to have a marriage ceremony, with the pastor and such, but some people just would run to the justice of the peace because that's where they could get their marriage license. Well, a justice of the peace, now it seems to be the justice of the peace, they are kind of trying to do away with them. So they once had justice of the peaces in every single state. They'd call them JPs. And every state used to have these, and they were the bottom level. And And they were primarily, in small towns and rural areas. Each small town would have their own justice of the peace. And this dates back clear to medieval times, it says in England. That that justice of the peace, they went way back to the year like 900 or something. When you think of the monarchies, but not only monarchies, you think of the lords and the ladies and all this, but they would have justice of the peace way back then. So the name goes way back. And they'd have jurisdictions in the little towns and counties and rural areas at that time. So the justice of the peace today, there's not too many of them left, and we'll see, basically why. But they would have a term, they would be elected for like 2 to 4 years. They had no regular pay. So basically the county or the town, that area, whatever, would pay as they saw to pay a JP, but they weren't recommended any regular pay. They usually were just an ordinary citizen. Some of them didn't even have any legal training, so a lot of them were not lawyers. And some even JPs held their court in their home or their store or their office. So see how a lot of these, why some of the reasons that they've been done away with in some states. But what did they handle? Well, they would handle cases of the town cases, like things like traffic violations, so they would do traffic violations. They would do things like, disturbance of the peace. Somebody was disturbing the peace, maybe somebody was running around disturbing the peace, running around naked or something, those kind of things. Public drunkenness, so they would look at that case. Any type of minor offenses the JP would take. Also, a lot of times the JPs, they would look on, the justice of the peace would look on to see if a case was really serious and needs to go for trial. So they would refer a lot of these. What were some of the powers of the JP? So here's a Bullock County Courthouse in Statesboro, Georgia. Maybe the justice of the peace from that courthouse. So you see, usually they're from the courthouse. So what were some of his things empowered a JP could do? He could set the bail for someone from that was waiting to be put on trial. They could issue search warrants. They could issue license, all kinds of different license, fishing license for whatever. Also perform marriages. They could perform marriages and give out marriage license. They also could be a notary public. And in a lot of civil cases, here, they may also act as a notary public that may handle civil cases involving amounts of money up to $100 or $200. So that's not a lot of money, but they could handle those cases as a notary public. So you can see how a lot of these JPs now it's considered, well, I don't know, we probably need a system a little different than a JP, because they're gradually now being replaced. Another type of low court besides the JPs are the magistrate courts. So in very sparsely populated areas, they'll have magistrate courts and police courts. And they're similar to the JPs, the Justice of the Peace. And they're presided over by elected judges or magistrates for the magistrate courts. Now we're still in that bottom layer, the court system, those lower courts. So a magistrate court is the lower court. But a magistrate court may appeal to a higher court if need be. And some states require that a magistrate court have a lawyer, so it used to be they didn't have to, but now they do. The terms usually, they serve for like 4 to 6 years. Remember the JP is about 2 years as much, 2 to 4 years. And these are 4 to 6 years for the magistrate courts. And they have a fixed, pretty low salary. They don't make a lot of money. And some of these have been replaced. These magistrate courts in bigger cities have been replaced by municipal courts. And these municipal courts have a very broader jurisdiction, and they're presided over judges too. These municipal courts, there's a lot of them you will be familiar with in your life, because when you look at municipal courts, you think of what? Well, right here it says the courts of limited jurisdiction. Basically, you'll see courts. Traffic court. A lot of people have to go to traffic if you have a speeding ticket, right? Domestic court. A domestic court is basically domestic violence in a family, maybe, that court case in some way, or a domestic court between the custody of children. Onto small claims court. And small claims court is going in the midst of any claims claiming that they've been wrong did, or they didn't pay what they were supposed to pay, that kind of stuff. Small claims court with a plaintiff and a defendant. Onto the probate courts and juvenile court. The juvenile courts for those that are under 18, they all fall under municipal courts. So there's a lot of different courts. So small claims, here it is, family courts, police courts, probate. So a lot of these lower courts now have gone through the municipal. Municipal is a bigger, remember it's JP, Justice of the Peace, then into the magistrate courts, and then municipal courts. And these all are in this lower court. So on to the next layer, the next level, I should say, is the main trial courts. That's when you go and you see it on TV when you have the big trials. So this is the trial court. They don't really have trials. They don't have trials in the lower levels. They may be referred up to the trial court though. And they don't have trials in the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. The trials all happen in the main trial court. The main trial, general trials court, they call it. And it's the second level, as we see here. The first level was that the lower municipal courts here, courts of limited jurisdiction, and onto the main trial court. So it's divided into state districts, and sometimes these districts represent counties, and each district has a general trial court. So they'll have the courts of record. Courts of record, basically the courts of record is the transcripts. So the trial courts always have transcripts. They always have a record. Everything that's said in the midst of a trial is put on record. They have a very broad jurisdiction. A lot of different kinds of cases come through trials, that's for sure. Both of them are criminal cases and civil cases that come to the trial. Because anything over $20 you can go to trial for, if you knew that. But basically, they have the jurisdiction of the trial to go to trial. And some cases from the trial courts go to the state of appeals. They're appealed to the appellate courts. And sometimes the trial courts, some of them are appeals already, but very, very few. So the decision of the general trial court is usually final. So usually the trial court, their decision, whatever they came at, is usually a final decision, so. They rarely are appealed, but some of them are. So usually the trial court, after they've gone to trial and they have a verdict, usually that verdict stands, so. But some they may have problems in the midst of their trial, and so then they'll be referred up to the appellate courts to appeal that. The judges over the trial courts are usually elected, and they serve like 4 to 6 year terms, and usually they have a single judge unless they have a very heavily populated area, and they might need more than one judge. And most cases of the trial court, of course, are heard by a jury that decide the facts. They have to have a jury. But sometimes, though, if they're going to a trial court and both sides decide, we don't want a jury, we're going to just let the judge decide. So they can do that. They'll say, we're just going to let the judge decide. We're not going to have a jury. So they don't have to have a jury unless they want to have a jury. So that's the trial. On to the appellate courts, the state court of appeals. They're called the circuit courts. They usually call them circuit courts of appeals. And these are the intermediate appellate courts of states of appeal. And sometimes the judges are appointed by the governor there, but most of them are elected to like 6 to 8 terms. Remember, the justice of the peace is like, what, 2 to 4, and then onto the trial court is 4 to 6, and now we have 6 to 8 years for the appeals court, the higher court level. And these judges look at all the cases that come through to them, and basically to see they have no original jurisdiction, you know, that these are all cases that are coming from the lower courts that are appealing to them. And they go through them, they study the briefs, and they hear their lawyers, and they examine the trial records to see how they handle. And they see to make sure that their constitutions were correctly interpreted in the midst of the whole trial, and they do not hold trials themselves. And then it may go to the higher court, which is the Supreme Court if need be, but rarely they go they're just, you know, rarely when they, all of these, basically these courts of limited jurisdiction, those that may go to trial, go to the trial, and then from trial they go to the state of appeals, and then they go on to the state Supreme Court. So, and that is, you know, basically, that's the highest court that they can go to. The Supreme Court. Let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court. I'm almost done. So let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court here. The state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court has an important role. It gives basically it's the top level of the judicial system, where all the Court of Appeals go to the Supreme Court. It has 5 to 7 judges usually. Some have 9 judges. In Delaware, they only have like 3 judges. But the Supreme Court usually has those 5 judges that are deciding on different things. And usually the Supreme Court is appointed by the governor. You know, a lot of these judges are appointed by the governor and voted on to be in there. They do not conduct trials in their Supreme Court. You think court, they go to trial. No, they just hear from the lower courts. The lawyers go to them and present their cases of how the appeals come from the court, and they uphold the law, or they can say, okay, this law is unconstitutional, you know, but the Supreme Court can advise too in the midst. They even can, the Supreme Court of the states can even advise the governor on certain executive actions. So this, when you talk about the Supreme Court, it's the court of last resort. Means it's the last resort. They're not going to be able to appeal any farther. So unless, only one exception, and that's, it can go to the federal Supreme Court if there's a problem with the United States Constitution or any federal laws. The only rare, and that's very, very rare. So usually this last Supreme Court is the court of last resort. There's no place else to go unless there's a problem with the federal system. The last thing I want to talk really quick about, and that's the jury system. Because you might have to be in a jury someday. Here's a picture. It says, the 18th century engraving illustrates how the court should rule by blindly weighing the facts when considering the appropriate justice. So the jury system. So you might be on a jury sometimes. This is very important. You might be a citizen, and it gives a citizen opportunity to see how the government works by being on a jury. What is a jury? A jury is a group of people that's selected to ascertain the truth on the basis of evidence presented to them. And of course, we went over the 2 types. There's the grand jury, and that's when the grand jury just gets evidence to see if they need to send out an indictment to somebody that needs to go to trial. So the grand jury is just looking at evidence. You don't sit on a jury trial and watch a trial. That's the grand jury. Then there's the little jury, or the petite jury, or the trial jury. And that's what you see usually on television when you have jurors sitting and watching a trial, and all these people being interviewed as witnesses on the trial. So how do you get selected on a jury? First of all, they give you a long list of prospective juries. Well, they are given this long list. And where do they get this list from? let's see, they get it from your DMV. They go to the DMV. That's at the DMV now. They have voter registration, so they can go to the DMV and get names. Taxpayer rolls. They can look at the taxes and those who pay taxes. So driver's license, taxpayer rolls, voter registration are the three ways they can get your name to be on a jury. So almost everyone does that. So almost everyone will have a chance in their life to be on a jury if they get chosen. So these names are chosen usually at random, and then they send out a sheriff sends out a court order, and it's written, to you specifically at your house. And then when you need to report for jury duty, you have to report to jury duty unless you have a hardship, or unless you're eliminated. Say that you're under 21 years old. If you're 18, you can't be on a jury. Say that you've been convicted of a felon. Say you're a felon, you cannot be on a jury. Say that you're elderly, very elderly, and you can't get there. Or maybe you don't know how to read, or you're in poor health and your health is not, that you cannot come to be on a jury. Or it's a very hardship for the family. I actually had a hardship when Jessica was, for the family when Jessica got hurt, and I was called for jury, and I said I had to be there for her, and they let me off from the jury. So there's a lot of ways that they will take you off, so you will not have to be on the jury or be selected. They give you this long list of questions, and then both sides interview you. A lawyer asks you questions, and some lawyers, they'll have certain questions to see because they're representing their whoever they're representing. They know what kind of juror they want for their candidate, or the prosecutor will know what kind of jurors they want, maybe. So they kind of look through and ask questions and see, maybe you have an attitude towards capital punishment, or they see you have an attitude that you'd be not good for their defendant, and they'll ask these questions and they'll say, no, we don't want that person on a jury, that juror is biased. So they do not want a biased juror. So if you on a traffic court thing and you don't believe, basically they'll ask you questions about, do you believe it's okay, to sometimes run a red light or something, or it's just weird questions they ask you to see if you'd be good on that court. So they do this process, takes a long time, and they choose their jurors. The jurors are chosen. And so then you find themselves, if you are chosen as a juror, you're in this other pool, or you're chosen as a possible juror, then you're in this other pool, and then they'll choose their jurors, and then you can be put on as a witnesses, and you're going to be testifying under oath as a witness, and they'll bring in all of this evidence, and you have to decide with the juror if the person is going to be guilty, is going to be the verdict of the guilty is going the verdict's going to be guilty or innocent, or what the verdict's going to be. So you are basically as a witness, as the judicial process, you're testifying under oath as a witness, as on the jury. So you have that. This is a big civic responsibility of the citizens. And now almost all citizens, sometimes in your life, will probably be called to be on jury duty in some way, or be a candidate for jury duty. So let's go over the questions really quick. Let's see. We'll go back to the questions. So questions. We'll be done with this. What percentage of all court cases are heard in states? 90% of all the court cases are heard in the state courts. So list the 4 basic levels of the state courts. So we have the lower courts, basically courts of limited jurisdiction, those lower courts, which are magistrate and justice of the peace and such, onto municipal courts. And then it goes up to the general trial courts, where they have the trials. That's the second level. And then they go to the state court of appeals. those court cases that have been appealed to the next level, because they may have a problem in their verdict. And then the last resort is the Supreme Court of that state. So let's go on to number 3. List several of the specific divisions of the municipal courts. Well, municipal courts will have things like traffic courts, domestic courts, small claims, probate courts, juvenile courts. All those are on the bottom. Name the courts intended to ease the caseload of the state's highest court. Those are the state's court of appeals. I think I said that already. Those would be those courts that are basically taking the trial cases, state courts of appeals, before they go to the Supreme Court. What is the purpose of a witness in a jury trial? A witness is to present truth. A jury is a group of people selected to ascertain the truth on the basis of evidence presented to them. So that's it. So we're going to go on then to local. We went over the whole thing on state. So, okay, we're done for today.